Hi, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Crew Travel right here on Yachting International Radio. My name is Ria. I am your host, and I am pleased to welcome back Lee Harris from Blue Marine Travel. How are you, Lee?
Yeah, I'm very good. Thanks, Ria. Thanks for having me once more.
Of course. I mean, it's been a busy week again. We talked about it last week, the fact that we were it was getting a bit slow out there, but all of a sudden everything's kicked off again, and we're seeing a lot of cancellations, a lot of different, but I mean, there are some places that are opening up again. I mean, let's talk about South Africa. There's great news coming out of South Africa for crew.
There is, yeah. I mean, for all the doom and gloom of Europe at the moment, South Africa is a bit of a beacon of light, which is, who would have thought we'd be saying that 2 or 3 months ago? But yeah, this past week they've announced a reopening of its borders to all international travellers now. South Africa had originally opened their borders to only a select few countries, obviously with most of Europe and USA on the red zone, and as such banned for leisure travel. The good news is that the ban has now been lifted and all business and leisure travellers are free to travel to South Africa once again. Now, to be able to enter South Africa, you're going to need to have the following though, and this is important. You're going to need a negative COVID test dated no more than 72 hours before you arrive. Your international flight still has to arrive at either Johannesburg, Cape Town or Durban, and passengers must also install the COVID Alert South Africa app. Now, without one of those free, then you might run into trouble, especially when you're trying to check in for your flights. So make sure you've got those free. Anybody who travels without the negative COVID test result are subject to mandatory quarantine at their own expense. Back to the good old days, obviously. The only exemption to not needing a negative test for coronavirus are children under the age of 5.
Well, I mean, that is good news. There's, some restrictions apply, but at the end of the day, a few months ago, I mean, it was difficult for crew, even crew with their special exemptions, to get in and out at any stage. I mean, they had to jump through a million hoops just to get home or to get to work. So, this is great news.
It is, yeah, like you say. I mean, 2-3 months ago, it was literally just repatriation flights for South African citizens to go home. Other than that, nobody was allowed in the country. This sort of 2-3 month period where they've sort of really turned it around, which is great news for them and for people who want to go there for tourism reasons.
Yeah. Well, I mean, all of a sudden, Spain now has fairly similar to South Africa. I mean, they do have closed lists, but they also have new mandatory testing requirements.
That's correct. Yep. So Spain are going to demand a negative PCR test also taken no more than 72 hours before departure from all travellers from countries in high coronavirus risk zones. That was announced by the Health Ministry on Wednesday just gone. The measure will go into effect on November the 23rd. The Spanish government have considered the possibility of introducing a mandatory quarantine, but finally and thankfully they opted for the negative PCR test result instead, which is good news. This will not be required of people coming in through land borders, though. I'm not quite sure how they make the difference between the land borders, but it's needed for travellers coming in by sea or air. Again, I'm not quite sure how land borders are not affected quite so much as sea and air, but there we go. The list is going to be reviewed every 15 days, and the update will be available on the Health Ministry website and also the Spain Travel Health website. Obviously, we'll put links to both of these at the bottom of the interview.
Is there any airlines that are offering these flights? Because I know we spoke a couple of weeks ago and there was a few airlines that were offering tests for free as part of the flight. Is there any airlines in and out of Spain that are offering that?
Not to Spain at the moment that I'm aware of. We spoke, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, that United have started select flights on the Newark to London route and vice versa. Also, Lufthansa have announced that they're now doing it just on a domestic flight between Munich and Frankfurt, or one of their domestic routes anyway, which is also going to be what they class a COVID-free flight, where people get tested basically when they get to check in and they have the results back within 30 minutes. At this moment in time, I don't know of any that are happening for Spain, but it certainly looks like it's definitely a procedure that a lot of the airlines are going to start looking at, which again is going to be good news.
Yeah, well, it'll give a little bit more freedom. Of course, we're talking about a little bit more time at the airport when you get there. You've got to make sure you're there earlier. But you know what? I mean, in comparison to the past 6 months, as far as flying goes, that inconvenience is nothing, really.
Exactly right. And I know for a fact that the Lufthansa one, they were, the Lufthansa free flight, they were talking about basically only having to be there 3 hours before your flight departs. So it's only an hour extra than what you would normally do anyway. So, for 3 hours, no one, you've got peace of mind that you've got a COVID-free flight, to me, it's a no-brainer. You know, I'd happily take that flight any day of the week. So, yeah, for an extra hour of your time, I don't think it's a massive ask, to be honest.
Well, 1 hour compared to peace of mind, I think it's well worth it.
1 hour or 14 days as well, you know, these places that
That's
have
right.
quarantine. So, you know, I mean, I'd love to see New Zealand go this way. You know, if they could get Air New Zealand or Emirates or Qatar or whoever to get a COVID-free flight operating in and out, and then you can scrap the quarantine, it would be great. You know, it'd be perfect. We could start getting people back in, especially with the America's Cup coming up in New Zealand in January.
Yeah.
Supposedly going to be a massive event, but it now looks like it's going to be massively watered down because you can't get people in. You know, maybe this is a way that they should be looking at to get these people to be able to travel, but I guess time will tell.
Well, I mean, no government has done anything perfectly at this stage. And I mean, we're seeing that they're still figuring things out, with Spain deciding that a land border is different than air and sea. So
who knew coronavirus couldn't get through a land border? If only
I
we
know, right? That coronavirus is pretty smart.
He's
It doesn't like to travel by car. It prefers
oh,
airline or you know, a yacht.
Yeah.
Really.
Just must be travel sickness, I'm guessing.
Probably. And so Europe's lockdown. I mean, just straight across Europe now, we're seeing that there's a lot of things that are happening in France and Italy, etc.
Yeah, unfortunately so. The sort of fallout of European countries going back into lockdowns really been felt again this week. Another two airlines, KLM and Virgin Atlantic, have both drastically reduced their schedules once more. KLM have announced a cutting their services during the lockdown period, with several routes coming completely off their timetable. Most notably a full regional connection, within the UK. So these being Southampton, Cardiff, Inverness and Teesside. They're all been scrapped until at least February next year. This is quite a big blow because we do have a lot of crew who fly from these regional airports who are now going to have to make their way to London or further afield, unfortunately. Virgin Atlantic have also announced that they'll now be operating only 37 flights a week until the end of the lockdown period in the UK on the 2nd of December. These 37 flights will only span 14 destinations, which include USA, India, South Africa, China, and Barbados.
Wow, it definitely is affecting everything straight across the board.
It is. We've noticed again this week, you know, I mean, we literally, at our company at the moment, we could literally employ one person just to deal with cancellations full time on a daily basis. That's how bad it is at the moment within Europe. You know, it is a complete nightmare. There's no other way of saying it. You know, the flights are that bad. The cancellations are just numerous. I think the other day we had around about 64 sitting on there for us to action. So it's just crazy at the moment. And you know, hopefully, fingers crossed, when the lockdown finishes on the 2nd of December, then the airlines will get back to some kind of level of schedule, you know, which is going to be able to facilitate crew changes.
Now, we've talked about this before. Are we still seeing airlines selling flights that actually don't exist?
Yes, we're still seeing it. Yeah. The phantom flights, or the ghost flights, as we like to call them. Yeah, they're still being operated, certain routes, which is difficult to say the least. Yeah, it's difficult for people, you know. My wife was telling me about one of her colleagues at work who her brother was going to come over. He's a Swiss national. And he's going to come over to New Zealand to see her for Christmas, and he booked his flights, just booked them on the internet, paid for them, everything, and didn't realise that he couldn't get into the country. He didn't realise that the borders were closed. He'd even got his voucher for the quarantine here in New Zealand, and they allowed him to get it, even though he put in his Swiss passport holder, which is just crazy. So the poor guy had flights, hotel, everything booked for the 27th of December, only to be told that he couldn't go.
And how likely is he to get all that money back?
Hopefully he'll get it back. I haven't found out. Thankfully, it wasn't booked through us whatsoever. It was just my wife asked me the question. I said, well, no, like he can't, you know, unfortunately he can't get in at the moment. And so then he phoned the airline, and they just said to him, look, you can't, but why are you selling seats without asking the questions? And why are New Zealand offering vouchers for the quarantine to non-New Zealand passport holders if they've not got a visa or a citizenship or, you know, a visa waiver or whatever? So,
well, I mean, that's pretty easy to check. I mean, yeah, you can even program that into your programming with if it's not a New Zealand, you know, national number. Obviously, it can kick it right back out.
You would think so. I mean, that's how easy it should be. But
Yeah.
for whatever reason, they've made it more difficult than it needs to be. And the poor public who maybe don't travel as much as they would, and who haven't done the research because they don't understand all of the processes and all of the restrictions that are in place, they get caught out on it. And fingers crossed, hopefully he gets his money back. But even if he does, he's going to be waiting, I would say, weeks before he sees that anyway. Fingers crossed it'll be before Christmas, but who knows?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, it is the way it is, right? Did you get any crew questions this week?
We did indeed. Yeah, we had a question this week with regards to travel to Chile on vacation. Currently, Chile is only open to Chilean nationals and valid resident visa holders. However, as from December, Chile is going to be relaxing its border control and tourists will be allowed to enter the country. The exact date for December has yet to be announced. But again, you will need a negative COVID test dated no more than 72 hours before arrival. You will also need to complete a health declaration form. All international travellers also have to enter the country via the international airport in Santiago.
That seems to be a growing trend, is that they're only sort of allocating certain airports for international travel as opposed to any airport as before.
Yeah, it does. It certainly does. Yeah. Whether that's to contain, if for whatever reason they had an outbreak, they can contain it a bit easier, I guess, with contact tracing. But yeah, it does certainly seem to be a growing trend, and also the 72 hours before arrival seems to be growing more now. We used to have 96 or 48 hours, but it does certainly seem to be a 72 hour for COVID tests.
See, I'm just personally, and I mean, I've seen it across social media, I'm not really understanding that, because you can go and get your test 72 hours before and then go partying or whatever it may be. And all of a sudden you come down with it, you've got it, but it was within 48 hours. I mean, how, I just don't understand 72 hours. I mean, the test that you take half an hour and get the results, while you're standing in line, I think that's probably much more realistic.
I mean, it certainly would be the way to go, wouldn't it? Like you say, 72 hours, what are the people doing, from that 72 hours onwards? They could be out partying, they could be doing anything. Nobody knows, do they? That's the question. But like you say, if you could get a uniformed approach where you're having COVID tests done at check-in, because we can see that it can be done because United are doing it, Lufthansa are doing it. Okay, only on selected routes at the moment, but it's obviously a viable opportunity, for it to happen. And it makes perfect sense. Full well then that you're negative, you get on a flight, everybody's negative, anybody who's been tested positive, they have to go home and they have to self-isolate for 10, 14 days, whatever they have to do. So to me, it seems a no-brainer, I've got to say, get it in place at the time of check-in and then everybody's happy.
Well, I mean, we saw this as well with the test being, administered once you arrived at your destination. The governments have, I think they're slowly trying to figure it out, but, the same sort of thing. It didn't make any sense. Once you got on the plane and then you got to your destination and then you took a COVID test, it was like, why? It just didn't make any sense. So again, possibly we're in that scenario and maybe they will start to rethink it and change those rules in time.
Well, let's hope so. I mean, even if they've done, like we said, they do a check-in, and then even if they wanted to do it at your final destination as well, just to have a double check, then I'm sure people wouldn't even mind that, to be honest with you. You have one at the departure airport, one at the arrival airport, and then you're on your way. Happy days. If for any reason you manage to test negative at your departure, but positive on your arrival, okay, then you have to self-isolate. There's ways I think that it can be worked better than what it is at the moment. Let's just hope that the airlines, the airports, the countries, that they can find some uniformed approach to it.
Well, I'm not sure if people won't mind, because I tell you, the amount of people that are complaining about having to take a test straight across social media is kind of baffling me. But you know what? I think human nature, if you don't have something to whine about, you're not completely happy. Oh, you mean I have to take a test to make sure I'm healthy and they all have to take a test to make sure they're healthy? Don't think I like that.
I think it's human nature. I mean, we are a suspicious bunch, aren't we? I mean, some obviously more than others, that's for sure.
Well, I think I saw a story there at some stage where somebody had punctured their brain or something. I don't know, but the stories that are out there, I don't know. I think we discussed it before, but the fact is, those people that didn't even take science in high school, all of a sudden they watched a YouTube video and they become, world-renowned scientists and know everything there is to know.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that social media it can be a wonderful thing when it's used in the right, in the right hands. But it's amazing how one thing can get posted by someone who has no scientific background or whatever, and it spreads like wildfire. It's fascinating to watch, to be honest.
Well, and as fact, not just spreading, this is fact.
Exactly right. Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
Great.
Oh, insanity. Anyways, thank you again, Lee, as usual. It's very imperative that we have these updates because, we've been mentioning, things are changing very fast. Each country has different rules and regulations. We are seeing a second sweep straight across the face of the planet. And it's really good to know some tips and tricks, especially when airlines are still selling these ghost flights. And people are still, the story with New Zealand, they're able to even get their voucher for quarantine. And it's impossible. If you're a Swiss national, you have to be, a citizen of New Zealand. So these tips are very, very, they're necessary.
Yeah, I think so at this moment in time, if, like I said before, even if it just helps one or two crew, if they're a little bit unsure or whatever, it's just such a difficult time for travel. It really is, and I think I mentioned last week, it's not easy for us guys working, who've been in the business for 15, 20 years. This has thrown a massive curveball at us as well, and we're still trying to get our head around certain things. And so I can only imagine what it's like for the general public who maybe travel once or twice a year at most. If they now got all this chucked on top of them as well, and everything you've got to look at on top of your flights, your quarantine, your COVID tests, it's so easy to go wrong. And when you're talking about flights and hotels and everything, it can be an expensive exercise if you do get it wrong. So, I'll just reiterate once more, if you can, even if you're just, I'm talking even retail. Obviously we're specialist marine travel for crew, but if there's anybody who's listening who are just looking to book a flight to go on holiday or whatever, I would fully recommend go with a retail travel agent. Don't try and book it yourself online because you really could come unstuck.
Well, and that extra 20 euros or $20 or 20 whatever that is going to cost you to book is well worth it because you might save yourself hundreds.
Exactly right. Yeah, it's exactly right. And these guys will know all the tricks, and they'll know about these phantom flights. They'll know everything that you need to, or even if they don't know, they'll find out for you. They'll do that research, and like you say, all right, it might cost you an extra 20, 30 euros, but believe me, that peace of mind is going to be well worth it.
Yeah. Well, once again, Lee, thank you very much. This has been Lee Harris from Blue Marine Travel out of New Zealand. You've been watching another episode of Crew Travel right here on Yachting International Radio. My name is Ria. I have been your host. Please tune in again next week.